Vladimir Putin has been ruling Russia since 1999. In that time, he shaped the country into an authoritarian and militaristic society. He successfully invaded two of Russia's neighbors and strengthened ties with Syria and Iran. He's intent on pushing back against the Western world order, and it appears to be working.
Putin, Vladimir Putin, 17 years and the most powerful man in the world.
To understand how one man could have such a powerful influence on this country, you need to go back to the chaos and corruption that gripped Russia after the fall of the Soviet Union. When the Berlin Wall fell, a 40-year-old Putin was working as an undercover spy in East Germany for the Soviet security agency, the KGB. The Soviet Union dissolved into 15 new countries, including the new Russian Federation. In Putin's eyes, Russia had just lost 2 million square miles of territory. He later called this a major geopolitical disaster of the century, lamenting that tens of millions of his compatriots found himself outside Russian territory. The new government had to sell off nearly 45,000 public businesses, like energy, mining, and communication companies that had been run by the communist regime, and it was chaos. The Russian economy was in a free fall, and all of these companies ended up in the hands of a few extremely wealthy men, known today as Russia's oligarchs. At the same time, the new Russian state was having a hard time establishing itself. Russia's first president, Boris Yeltsin, was wildly unpopular for cooperating with the West. And to make matters worse, he was an alcoholic, and many Russians thought he was an embarrassment. In order to stay in power, he leaned on the support of these oligarchs, surrendering an immense amount of political power to them. This graph shows how inequality actually worsened after the fall of the Soviet Union. This is where Vladimir Putin enters politics. He leaves the KGB in 1991 and becomes the deputy mayor of St. Petersburg. Putin uses his position to give special treatment to friends and allies in the private sector. He helps them structure monopolies and regulates their competitors, quickly becoming a favorite among the oligarchs. Before long, he's assembled a support network of oligarchs, crime bosses, and security officials, mostly fellow former KGB officers like he was. With their help, he rapidly ascends to the upper echelons of the new Russian state. In 1999, President Boris Yeltsin appoints Putin, still relatively unknown in national politics, to be the prime minister. A fierce nationalist, Putin feared Yeltsin was letting the US dominate Russia and that NATO, the alliance that worked for decades to contain Soviet influence, would expand into the new liberated countries and surround Russia. Putin's goal then became to build a strong Russian state, one that would be both stable at home and capable of exercising more influence over its neighbors. And he quickly got his chance. During the post-Soviet chaos, there was escalating violence in Chechnya, a region that had informally seceded from Russia in the mid-90s. Chechen warlords and terrorists were pushing into Russian territory and attacking the border. In August 1999, a series of deadly bombings killed more than 300 people in several Russian cities, including Moscow. Putin, the new prime minister, immediately blames Chechen separatists for the attacks. He regularly appears on Russian television, claiming he will avenge Russia. The population quickly rallies around him. Putin's approval ratings jump from 2% before the bombings to 45% after the bombings. Journalists later uncovered evidence that suggests Russian security services could have been complicit in the Moscow bombings, perhaps knowing they would spark support for a strong man like Putin. But a closed-state investigation quickly quashed any dissenting theories. So Russia launches a popular and devastating war in Chechnya. The capital city of Grozny was leveled by Russian bombing, and some estimate close to 80,000 people died. And in less than a year, Russia successfully brings Chechnya back under its control. In December 1999, Yeltsin suddenly resigns, making Putin the interim president. In May, during the bloody campaign in Chechnya, Putin wins the presidential election. He begins to shape the Russian state to his vision. Patronage and corruption remain some of his key tools, but he quickly suppresses the oligarchs under his rule. Those that support Putin are rewarded, those that don't are eliminated.
Well, once Russia's richest man, imprisoned Kremlin critic and former oil magnate Mikhail Khodorkovsky was sentenced to 14 years in jail, this on a new conviction of embezzling oil.
This is effectively a vendetta from Vladimir Putin for Khodorkovsky getting involved in opposition politics.
With the oligarchy tamed, Putin was now free to move his vision outside of Russia's borders. At the time, relations with the US were fairly good. Putin even vacationed at George W. Bush's summer home.
I looked the man in the eye. I found it to be very straightforward and trustworthy.
But things were about to change. In August 2008, Russia invades Georgia, a former Soviet republic. It's a display of aggression and strength on behalf of pro-Russian separatists there. Russia quickly annexes 2 small parts of Georgia, drawing condemnation from all over the world. Interestingly, though, Putin was not president during the invasion. See, the Russian constitution says a president can only serve 2 consecutive terms, but sets no limit on the total number of terms one can serve. So Putin took the prime minister role again, when his hand-picked successor Dmitry Medvedev served as president. When Obama is elected U.S. president in 2008, he attempts to reset relations with Russia, and they make some progress, most notably to limit both countries' nuclear arsenals. But Putin remains paranoid about U.S. intentions and remains opposed to these new relations. He's particularly bothered by U.S. interventions in the Middle East, especially in Libya in 2011. He publicly criticizes Medvedev for not vetoing the action in the UN Security Council. Putin announces his candidacy for president and wins the 2012 election by a preposterous margin.
Injustice, says Dmitry. This outrage can't continue. I'm here to say no to Putin.
Putin starts his 3rd term once again amid chaos. He doubles down on his authoritarian governance style at home and his militaristic strategy abroad. But in both cases, he showcases a mastery of information. Since he first took office in 2000, Putin has kept a tight leash on Russian television. Essentially, all news outlets are state-owned propaganda machines. His regime decides which stories air and how, always depicting him as the strong Russian leader. In 2012, he cracked down on human rights and civil liberties, making clear there was no room for dissent in his Russia. Using state television, for example, he administered a blistering campaign against a feminist and gay rights music group, Pussy Riot.
The latest and the loudest such performance was the so-called punk prayer at the Christ the Savior Cathedral, where they were yelling things which were rather profane to be yelled in church. Of course, 3 members of punk group Pussy Riot were convicted and sentenced to 2 years in prison.
Putin has also bolstered his aggressive foreign strategy. He's used traditional military methods, like sending weapons and fighter planes to help dictator Bashar al-Assad fight a bloody civil war in Syria. But Putin's regime has also developed and fostered the most effective cyber army in the world, and he's used it to wreak havoc in the West. These hackers have stolen classified US information, hacked politicians' email accounts, even shut down Georgia's internet while Russian troops invaded, and of course, they tried to sabotage Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign in 2016. Russian hackers have also launched propaganda campaigns in support of right-wing candidates in Europe. With this, Putin hopes to exploit and deepen the political divide in Western democracies. In 2014, the Putin vision culminated in the targeting of Ukraine, another former Soviet country. Ukraine's president was opening up to the West, and Putin feared he would join NATO. So Russian hackers launched a propaganda campaign against him, stoking protests in the pro-Russia eastern part of the country. He then sent in disguised Russian troops, and before long, violence erupts. In goes the Russian military, and in early 2014, Putin annexes Crimea. He continues to support the fighting in Ukraine, and as of 2017, over 9,000 people have died. The world erupts in protests, but Putin doesn't give in. See, his aggressive foreign policy successfully weakens his neighbors while also rallying Russians around him. But he has done all of this at the expense of his own people. His invasions have prompted harsh sanctions from the West, barring Russian businesses from trading in Western markets. Russian currency has plummeted in value, and the energy industry that Russia relies on is collapsing. It's hard to imagine Russia can continue under these circumstances. But the election of Donald Trump brings new hope for the Putin vision. Trump's rhetoric has been notably soft on Russia. He could lift sanctions and weaken NATO, potentially freeing up space for Putin's Russia to become a dominant power once again.
Oh shit. This is the Weird Shit Podcast.
Is that a joint, man?
And I wouldn't flaunt your ignorance.
Logic is an enemy and truth is a menace.
if you guys have been watching the news today or not, but earlier there's a pretty amazing clip from Trump's speech that he was giving to like a bunch of like toady-looking people behind him. Like one dude, no shit, looked like Boss Nass, like to his like back right, and and Trump was like talking about how like the Democrats were traitors for like not applauding for him, and all I could think of was like the fucking Palpatine thing where he's like, it's treason then.
Yeah, it's very Palpatine-esque. He didn't even come up with the idea. Someone in the back was just like, that's treason. He's like, yeah, why not?
Yeah, it's treason. Yeah, okay, that makes sense.
He's just so lazy about declaring the Democrats traitors. He's like, yeah, I guess so.
I guess it is treason. You're right, guy.
We should capitally punish all of them.
He's probably just sitting there like, I didn't say it. That guy said it.
Yeah, exactly. You voted for that guy, not for me.
I didn't say that. That guy over there said that.
That guy's smarter than me. He got his GED
and his GBD,
and I totally defer to his judgment.
Trump's super smart. He turned a small loan of $100 million into $50 million.
He's also completely stable.
Very stable.
He's a very stable genius.
He is the most stable.
I've definitely heard that on the street.
He's not piloted by a tiny green alien at all.
Welcome to Weird Shit Podcast. This is Mike.
This is a tiny green alien piloting Ryan.
What?
Huh?
Tiny green alien says what?
Where are you from?
Orion's belt.
Oh, there's someone at the door. He's in a black suit.
Did you just flash your thing, me?
Welcome to Weird Shit Podcast.
This is Doritos.
This is Doritos. This is Tide Pod.
This is Palmer.
Oh yeah, that's one of them.
Oh, you blew it. Now you gotta come up with more.
Now you got.
No, it's fine. I got a second one.
Oh, you got one. We gotta back up.
So today we're going to be talking about something that's probably going to end up getting me assassinated. You guys will probably be fine.
The consumption of Tide Pods. Wait, no.
That's not it. How Tide Pods can open up your pineal gland and allow you to see into the 9th dimension of consciousness.
The Tide dimension? Or is it the pod dimension?
I think it's phase 1 then phase 2.
What other kind of pods can we eat?
I think they got some with those cleaning agents in them.
It's like pea pods.
There's not the cleaning, like the sparkling dry or whatever the fuck that one's called. Where it's like it has like the orange and then the purple, and there's that little like
little
pearl thing in the middle.
Yeah, that's my favorite
that thing's
part.
Hot.
Tastes like candy.
That's the next step. That's phase 3.
And today we're going to be talking about the Russian apartment bombings, son.
Which one?
There's a bunch of them. And all of them are kind of sketchy.
Like sketchy apartments that got bombed, or
kind of both?
Oh, okay.
Because it's Russia.
What was the
in
other
the 90s.
option? You can't just say both when you only said one thing. Like sketchy apartments or both.
It is both, though.
Both.
But it is both, though.
It's both, though.
But what was the other one?
But it's both, though.
It's both. It's Russian for just go with it.
It's in Russia,
it's kind of like
sketch EU.
Who are the options to vote for in the Russian election? Putin or both?
Vladimir.
It's just like him with one of those like Groucho Marx fake mustaches on, like the big nose and mustache thing. Vladimir or Putin?
And then there's like
with 98% of the vote.
There's like a third bubble in like 2-sized font.
Guyevich Assassinovich.
Death.
Vladimir Assassinovich.
Who is KGB?
Who is sweet release of death?
Rasputin.
Yes. God, I wonder if Putin is just Rasputin.
I believe he is.
He like changed his name.
That's why Von
so that he
could
blend in. Yeah.
I don't know what Rasputin looks like. How do you spell Ras?
It's basically Putin with a big ass fake beard. That's basically who it is.
No.
So, the Russian apartment bombings were a series of explosions that hit 4 different apartment blocks in the Russian cities of Buynetsk.
Oh, wait.
Buynetsk.
I'm going to need you to say that in English.
Buynetsk. Next. Buynaksk.
Huh.
Buynetsk.
Never heard of it.
Next.
Yeah.
Moscow
neither did those people.
and Volgodonsk.
Volgodonsk? That place is awesome sounding.
That place sounds dope. Wonder what they do in Volgodonsk.
Donsk.
You can Donsk if you want. You can leave your friends behind.
You can leave your vunks behind.
And it was in September of 1999, and it killed around 293 people.
Ooh.
And injured more than 1,000.
So why did Putin do this? I mean, why did Rasputin do this?
So basically, these Russian bombings, in addition to what was called the Dagestan War, ended up leading the country into a second Chechnya War, which allowed Putin to step up and handle this, this crisis. This war that happens, and it shot his popularity way up. Because basically, what happened was in the 90s, Russia was not doing very good. Throughout the whole 90s, because after the fall of the Soviet Union, all these rich motherfuckers who had been friends are kind of dividing it up among themselves. They're like, man, everything's dirt fucking cheap right now. We can just buy people... people were given vouchers, which were basically their share in the gross national product of the whole country. And what these guys
GDP
did,
stamps?
Yeah, these guys would buy those from people. You don't know what to do with that. Give it to us. We know what to do with it. Here, you take this actual money, and we'll take those. Because you don't know what you're doing. And people would do that because they're like, I'm trying to feed my fucking family here.
I don't need this Pikachu whatever.
Yeah, this these Pokebucks. What am I supposed to do with this? And
I already got Jigglypuff.
And Russia at this point, around 1992, basically became a fucking third world country. They started giving off all of their raw materials, oil, gas, precious metals, anything, just selling it off just to try to keep the country afloat. And just in the years 1990 to 1994, male life expectancy fell by more than 6 years. In 1998, it was 57 years, which was the lowest anywhere.
Yeah.
Anywhere in the industrialized world.
Their life expectancy was just a bullet icon.
It was just a picture of the motherland. And child mortality doubled, compared to what it had been.
Isn't the term third world country just for those countries who aren't actively in war? Isn't that what that's supposed to mean? Versus first world?
Probably.
I always thought it was just
But basically what
I believe it's Trump called them is shithole.
Yeah, basically that's what it's come to mean now is a shithole country.
It says the term third world arose during the Cold War to define countries that remain non-aligned with either NATO or the communist something. It cuts off because
I guess that kind of still fits.
Yeah, it still kind of fits.
Or neutral. So I guess Switzerland is a third world country.
Got you on the technicality, bitches.
You rich, healthcare having, pot smoking bastards.
Pocket knife, mother.
Yeah,
you think you can get cancer and go to a hospital and get treated for it without bankrupting your whole family? Fuck you, Sweden.
I think Russia would be considered a second world country, which you don't hear ever. But it says second world, things like Soviet Union, China, and their allies.
They're second and a half.
Yeah. So I would imagine
they're 2.5 countries.
Two and a half.
Second world. Anyway.
So during the 1990s, 750,000 people a year died in Russia.
I mean, that seems pretty normal. It's pretty cold. Probably just died of cold.
How much had that, like,
bullets?
How much annual deaths had that, like, gone up?
It was a huge increase. I don't have, like, the numbers from before then, but during the 90s, 750,000 people a year died.
It's like that one meme, guess I'll die.
Yeah. I mean, it's Russia.
Yep.
You gotta feed your kids. You might as well die so they can
guess
eat
I'm
you.
food.
Like, something.
Guess I'll gulag.
And basically, this is when they started giving out these ruble things, which were part of the government's. It was basically an IOU from the government. Is what it was.
Like Dumb and Dumber IOUs.
They were called GKOs, and they usually had like a 3 to 6 month term. And the market ended up growing from $3 billion at the end of 1994 to $47.6 billion in 1996, and then $64.7 billion in 1997.
So it was just growing really rapidly.
Yeah, they just created like false inflation. Basically, they're like, let's make a lot of fake ass money and blow up our economy with it.
Dude, so I got a chart on Wikipedia that says the Russian, like, basically population or whatever over the years, and it's like 1987 is like their highest population they've ever had, and then it just slowly, I mean, it pretty steadily decreases all the way to the year 2000, and it cuts down almost 1 million people, both female and males, and then starts slowly rising back up.
Wow.
That's fucking nuts.
And they were all just getting bombed in apartments? Is that what they were dying?
There was a couple other things.
Just making sure.
And there was a little war going on in Chechnya as well.
Pesky Chechnyans.
So,
well, they're no longer there, so who's laughing now?
Not Chechnya.
All the way to the bank.
Yeah.
So, basically, like, the government is making all this fake-ass money, and because of that, the rates of interest were climbing, sometimes more than 200% interest on things, which is fucking ridiculous.
It's pretty interesting.
And then by the middle of 1998, the government was spending $1 billion a week just to pay for its obligations.
To the whorehouses.
Yeah.
Well, and the potato farmers.
And so on August 17th of 1998, they voted to devalue their currency and defaulted on $40 billion worth of those IOUs that they had handed out to people.
Is that like they just kind of declared bankruptcy?
Yeah.
And then just...
The government's like, yeah, we got no money.
Thanks for all that shit.
Yeah.
Can't pay you.
Just like one guy who's filled his house like with IOUs. He's just, fuck.
Is there like a credit score, but for countries?
There is actually.
Yeah, there is. I don't remember what it's
ours
called.
Went down not too long ago.
Yeah,
I mean, I could
fucked
imagine.
it up.
We're not considered broke as fuck.
We've been fucking it up.
We ain't got no money. We got like a couple aircraft carriers in cash though.
Like people came back from, like, literally people came back from summer vacation, and then their bank's ATMs were locked. Like, that's how it happened. Like, people were like, hey, I'm back from summer. Oh, shit. Like, why isn't this ATM doing anything? Like, because that's how much of a surprise it was on the Russian people. Like, they just went, boom, you got no money. And, like, currency exchange points posted new ruble-dollar exchange rates every hour. People began to scoop up everything in the stores, including salt, sugar, matches, and flour. And many small businesses collapsed, and there was a rash of contract killings of borrowers who could not repay their debts. Living standards fell by an estimated 40%.
Wow. Only 40%?
Only 40%. So it was already pretty bad.
It was from 40% to 0.
And,
so you're saying it's free?
Yeah, it's free standards of living.
So,
all hail Putin.
It's free of a standard of living.
As you can imagine, Yeltsin wasn't looking very good at this point. He's like, ugh, like you can feel him like breathing down his neck.
Chain smoking like a whole pack.
Because at this point, for years, he'd already been like a huge embarrassment to Russia because he'd like consistently smashed out of his mind, like always drunk, always, and like he'd be like on TV chugging booze, or he'd be like falling downstairs because he was so fucking drunk, or like not being able to figure out how to get into like the back of his limo because he's so drunk, and meanwhile everyone's starving to death and like losing everything.
He's that one drunk guy at the ATM where he he's, like over the course of 5 minutes slowly drops the bottle and shoots everywhere.
Oh,
he's that video of the guy like leaning against everything in the convenience store to try to open the cooler to get more beer.
Yeah.
Like that's what Yeltsin was.
I'm pretty sure that guy was not just drunk.
Just completely like falling over, like hanging on to the fucking like
That's
door
Russian
of
drunk.
the cooler, like he's gonna fall otherwise.
I just really
Yeltsin
like
drunk.
that gif of what Ryan was talking about, where the guy drops the bottle and lands perfectly straight up and just fucking explodes beer. Like, oh man, God, that one's good.
So,
because he just looks so sad. Like, he's just like, oh, my beer.
There's just that big ass line of people waiting on him.
ATM beer gif. Let's see what happens. First try. I think that's what it is anyway. I think it's actually soda, but it just based on what he looked like, it's got to be fucking beer.
I think it's beer.
God damn.
So, basically, all that is to say that that Yeltsin was fucked.
Okay. It's Yeltsin. Is that Boris Yeltsin?
And the FSB. I gotta see this.
The best part is in like a glass container around the ATM, and it's just all over the glass, and the person standing next to him is
so screwed.
And he's just like, God damn.
That was the first bottle challenge.
And the whole time, Yeltsin had his the director of the FSB for Yeltsin was none other than a Mr. Vladimir Putin.
Oh.
And Putin had even done stuff like secretly filmed one of Yeltsin's political opponents, Skuratov, in a sauna engaging in sex with 2 prostitutes.
Skoratov?
Skuratov.
Yeah, you don't fuck with a guy named Skoratov.
Apparently they fucked with him because the film was shown on the state television channel, RTR, in prime time. He shows this video with this guy fucking 2 prostitutes, and Skuratov was forced to resign.
Really? I figured they would have promoted him for that.
Yeah, I know.
It's Russia.
It's Russia.
Very nice, comrade.
Believe it or not, Russia, ultra-conservative country.
That is surprising.
Yeah. Kind of weird, but very conservative country in a way that should worry people.
Yeah. In a way that they're clearly the opposite behind closed doors.
Yeah. Like this is a country that arrested a band because their name was Pussy Riot, and they like showed their titties.
That's true.
Like they're like lock them in prison and torture them for like months, because
I figured they were just having a bad hair day.
that's another thing. Putin doesn't like people with hair. He does not.
Or eyes. Or toes.
In September 1999, 4 bombs exploded across Russia, sending the nation into a terrified frenzy. The government were quick to blame terrorists from the separatist Russian Federation of Chechnya. But with no hard evidence linking these groups to the bombings, many suspect the government framed the rebels to consolidate its own grip on power. Just weeks before, the relatively unknown former intelligence agent Vladimir Putin was elected Russian Prime Minister. With low poll ratings but big ambitions, Putin was desperate for a way to make his mark with the Russian people. The bombings provided that opportunity. Stanford Journal editor Jeff Carr argues the bombings are critical because they began a chain of events catapulting Vladimir Putin into the presidency. The first attack took place at 9:45 a.m. on September the 4th, when a car bomb exploded outside an apartment block in Dagestan. 2 hours later, police intercepted a second bomb concealed near the hospital where victims were being treated. But this was just the beginning. 2 more bombings followed on the 9th and 13th of September in Moscow. The final deadly attack took place on the 16th of September in the city of Volgodonsk. In total, 293 people were killed, and over 1,000 more suffered gruesome injuries. The Russian government claimed the bombings followed a Chechen trail, indicating the separatist territory of Chechnya had masterminded the attacks. However, this trail did not contain any concrete proof of Chechen involvement. Many, like Russian former media mogul Boris Berezovsky, suspected the government of foul play. Berezovsky died mysteriously in 2013. Russian politician Sergei Kovalov says the government needed a crisis in order to exercise a more authoritarian state. The attacks were the perfect scenario for this to play out. He described the attacks as a critical turning point in Russian history. After the first shock passed, it turned out that we were living in an entirely different country. Importantly, there was a clear motive for this. Russia was already embroiled in conflict with Chechen forces in Dagestan. As well as being a popular stance, blaming the Chechens gave Putin an excuse to start the Second Chechen War and crush the opposition. John Dunlop, senior fellow emeritus at the Hoover Institution, notes that the Kremlin barely investigated the attacks. He points out that if the culprits were unknown, it is almost unheard of that the government would not investigate a series of fatal terror attacks. It suggests that the government engineered the attacks for political goals. The implications of this are huge. Journalist and Soviet Union expert David Satter says the bombings are important because they pose the question of whether Putin is a terrorist. The answer may lie in another bomb, which was intercepted in Ryazan before it detonated. This was the only instance in which the perpetrators were captured. Amazingly, they were identified as working for the FSB, the Russian State Security Service. Following their arrest, the FSB director Nikolai Petrushov announced they had been planting the bomb as part of an anti-terrorism training exercise. But this admission did not hold under scrutiny. When police examined the device, it tested positive for hexogen. This was the exact same chemical that was used in the previous deadly attacks. David Satter believes Putin's government carefully concealed all other evidence linking it to the attacks. If true, this includes the extermination of anyone who knows the truth. Several journalists investigating the attacks have met horrible ends. One of them, Yuri Shkochikhin, contracted a mystery illness in 2003. The disease caused his skin to peel off and his organs to collapse. He died before he was able to present his findings to the public commission on the attacks. When Russian authorities refused to carry out an autopsy, Shkochikhin's family sent samples of his flesh to British doctors. They concluded he died from thallium poisoning. Another journalist, Anna Politkovskaya, repeatedly published articles accusing the Putin regime of organizing the bombings. She was shot dead in her apartment building elevator in 2006. Then, Russian state security officer Alexander Litvinenko publicly accused Putin of sanctioning her murder. Litvinenko was fatally poisoned a fortnight later. High-profile figures, including British Prime Minister Theresa May, say these deaths are a clear threat from the Kremlin to those thinking about leaking information. Proof that the Kremlin creates this climate of fear emerged when a diplomatic cable was leaked from Moscow's US embassy. Sent on March 24, 2000, it contained classified information from a former Russian intelligence officer. In the cable, the anonymous officer said the truth about the bombings must remain secret because the truth would destroy the country. However, Many of the claims that Putin engineered the 1999 attacks come from people who are strongly opposed to his government. Consequently, political commentators like Ingemar Wernstrom say Putin is the victim of a vicious smear campaign intended to remove him from power. Furthermore, while there are many suspicious elements to these attacks, there is no firm proof directly linking them to Putin. Much of the evidence comes from anonymous sources, and although these individuals often refer to evidence, until it actually materializes, there is no reason to believe proof exists. So, though proof that the Chechens are guilty is scarce, it does not mean Putin is responsible. The circumstances around the bombings are anything but clean-cut. Putin definitely benefited from the fallout of the attacks. He had the motive and the means to carry out a false flag attack on his own people. However, there is no clear evidence for his involvement, and there is evidence, however scant, that Chechen rebels carried out the attacks. In truth, the mystery may never be solved.
So basically, in the 90s, Russia was fucked. And Yeltsin was double fucked because he was seen by the people as the one responsible. And so he and his oligarch buddies were like, well, we need...
Whatever happened.
We're like, we're sorry, Boris, but like, we can't keep covering for you, man. Like, you've been fucking up too much. We need a new face so that the people don't get smart and start picking other people to be in charge of the country.
Right.
And basically that ended up being Putin.
Right. Whatever happened to Sakharyokov, or whatever his name was?
Sir Kryakov? I'm sure he was assassinated.
I thought his name was Sarcophagus.
He was the Egyptian candidate. It's a fucking mummy standing at the debate. They're like, Mr. Putin, your opponent has accused you of stealing his organs. Putin's like, he is weak and made of cloth. And he's like,
he's 3,000 years old and Egyptian. He's
Curse!
not fit leader.
Curse! And so, that brings us to a Mr. Vladimir Putin.
Vladimir Putin.
A.K.A. Vladdy Poots. A.K.A. Putinesky. A.K.A. Daddy rides a bear with no shirt on. Vladimir Putin was, let's see, born on the 7th of October, 1952, in Leningrad. In the Soviet Union. He was the youngest of 3 children. Vladimir Spiridonovich Putin. And Maria Ivanovna Putina were his parents.
Pretty Russian. That holds up.
His birth was preceded by the death of 2 brothers, Victor and Albert, who had been born in the 30s. So that's not a good time to be born in Stalingrad.
Anywhere.
Leningrad.
Yeah, especially Russia.
So, basically, his brother Albert died in infancy, and Victor died of diphtheria during the siege of Leningrad. Putin's mother was a factory worker, and his father was a conscript in the Soviet Navy, serving in the submarine fleet in the early 1930s. In World War II, his father served in the Destruction Battalion of the NKVD. Later, he was transferred to the regular army and was severely wounded. Putin's maternal grandmother was killed by the German occupiers of Tver region in 1941, and his maternal uncles disappeared at the war front. Because anybody who knows anything about World War II history, the fucking Russians lost all of their men. Literally all of their men pretty much died.
Yeah, all their young fighting men.
Yeah, any young fighting men. They lost like it's called like the Lost Generation because they literally lost a whole generation of people.
Yeah, they were just marching them straight into those spiked pits.
Yeah, it's like that scene in Outlander where he digs the pit. Yeah, Pathfinder. He digs the pit and everybody keeps jumping into it. It's like that, but Russians against Nazis.
Exactly.
But hey, they did it, so...
They didn't have guns, they were just throwing bullets.
They were eating their guns.
And the Nazis kept holding up mirrors, and the bullets would just bounce
back and kill them. and
it was really sad.
Luckily, they found out you could throw, like, snow on the mirrors. and then
when winter came, all the mirrors froze and cracked. So it could work. That's when they turn things around.
We know history. This is a history show. We should have put this in education.
That's right.
Instead of comedy, because we dropping truth bombs on these motherfuckers.
Disturbed in the house, we dropping truths.
Truths. And so in 1975, Putin's like, yeah, my life is shit. Everything has been shit. Like, I guess I'll become emperor. I guess I'll join the KGB. So he joins the KGB and trained at the Okta school in Leningrad. After training, he worked in the 2nd Chief Directorate of Counterintelligence before he was transferred to the 1st Chief Directorate, where he monitored foreigners and consular officials in Leningrad. For instance, and in 1985 to 1990, he served in Dresden, East Germany, which, fun fact, happens to be where Merkel's family grew up, which is why they don't like each other.
Yeah.
Because he was literally a KGB officer while she was a little girl in East Germany, so...
That makes things a little awkward.
That's probably a little awkward for them.
Why?
There's a really awesome picture you can find online of Reagan visiting East Germany, and like I think it's like 85 or 86 or something, and you can literally see Putin shaking hands with him because Putin is disguised as a tourist in these little tiny short shorts with like a little boy next to him who wanted like his picture taken with Reagan, and it's so fucking funny. Like,
that's when Reagan was like, yo, check this out, I'm gonna punch a hole through this wall.
Yeah. It's before Reagan got his arms replaced with robot arms, which would eventually drive him insane.
You think it's just because it's because the transmission fluid in the veins of his robot arms slowly leaked into his actual nervous system and then got into his brain, which then slowly just made him go insane.
They have to connect those things directly to your central nervous system.
I mean, how else are they going to move?
And, of course, that's going to crossbreed with your brainstem.
Not to mention they were 1st gen, so they're full of problems. Yeah. Never buy 1st gen. Never.
That's how he lost his humanity. R.I.P.
Reagan smash.
So, according to Putin's official biography, during the fall of the Berlin Wall that began on the 9th of November in 1989, he burned KGB files to prevent demonstrators from obtaining them. So this guy is a company man.
He is a company
This guy, he not only worked in, like, the, like, premier intelligence agency in the world, he was willing to, like, when there's riots and the fucking walls coming down and stuff, he's like, fuck it, I'm burning these files. Because ain't nobody getting our secrets.
Well, what if, like, he only burned the stuff that he knew contained information only about him? He was like, let's go to the P files. Let me burn all these. And the V files. Okay, let me go ahead and burn all these.
So,
go to the Bear Cavalry file.
Yeah, go into the Bear Cavalry file.
Go to the backwards R file.
He ended up serving with a bunch of different things other than just the KGB, including like a mining institute and also the FSB. Like he became the director of the FSB on the 25th of July of 1998. That was my birthday.
What? You were born in 1998?
I was born before 1998.
Okay, whatever, Putin.
And he basically became the guy in charge of the FSB.
Now that I know your birthday, I'm gonna dox you.
And then only a year later, Putin was appointed one of 3 first deputy prime ministers, and later on that day was appointed acting prime minister of the government of the Russian Federation by Boris Yeltsin. Yeltsin also announced that he wanted to see Putin as his successor. Still later on that day, Putin agreed to run for the presidency. So, that brings us to the year of 1999. So,
when The Matrix came out and changed all of our lives forever.
Changed everything. On the 31st of August, 1999, at 8 p.m. local time, an explosion took place in Okhotny Ryad shopping center on Mesnaya Square in Moscow. 1 person was killed and 40 others were injured. According to the FSB, the explosion had been caused by a very small bomb of only about 300 grams of explosives. On the 2nd of September 1999, an unknown person called and claimed that the bombing was committed by the Liberation Army of Dagestan.
Dagestan?
Yeah. So, it's literally like on the 2nd of September, after like 3 days after this bombing or whatever, some guy calls up and he's like, yo, it's like us, the Chechnyans, and we're like so mad, and then like hangs up the phone, like doesn't give his name or anything, like he's just like, yo, we did it.
It was old Chechenovich.
Yeah.
From Chechnya.
So on the 4th of September, which was only 2 days after this phone call in 1999, at 10 p.m., a car bomb detonated outside a 5-story apartment building in the city of Buyansk in Dagestan, near the border of Chechnya. The building was housing Russian border guard soldiers and their families. 64 people were killed and 133 were injured in the explosion. Another car bomb was found and defused in the same town. The defused bomb was in a car containing 2,706 kilograms of explosives.
Holy shit.
It was discovered by local residents in a parking lot surrounded by an army hospital and residential buildings.
Somebody was not messing around.
Yeah. So this second bomb was going to go off and take out that hospital and those residential buildings, but they caught it, so it wasn't going to.
Thanks to an anonymous Putin tip.
Yeah, an anonymous tip that shows that the government is not incompetent as they have looked to be throughout the entire 90s.
There was a bigger, worser bomb, and we got that one.
We totally caught it. Don't worry about it, y'all.
Go, go, Team Russia.
So, 5 days later, on the 9th of September, shortly after midnight, 300 to 400 kilograms of explosives detonated on the ground floor of an apartment building in southeast Moscow. The 9-story building was destroyed, killing 94 people and injuring 249 others.
Good God.
And it was a large enough explosion that it damaged 19 different buildings around the explosion. A total of 108 apartments were destroyed during the bombing.
Is it?
An FSB spokesman identified the explosive as RDX. RDX, if I can get this pulled up here.
Rasputin.
Magic. Magic.
Magic.
You said RDX?
RDX.
I don't know what the D stands for. Rasputin dick explosives.
Radio detonated explosive, maybe? RDX. RDX.
Radio detonated.
Radio
X.
Chechnya and Chechen. Chechen.
It's pulling up cars. Thanks.
Yeah, I was going to say, I was like, what's that?
I was about to say.
RDX is the organic compound with the formula blah blah blah. It's a white solid without smell or taste, widely used as an explosive. It is classified as a nitramide.
I prefer to use like strawberry flavored explosives.
I like how on Google the picture for TNT is Minecraft. The fucking TNT block from Minecraft. Dynamite.
And it was pretty much exclusively used in World War II as a Russian explosive.
Makes sense. It adds up.
It's stable in storage and is considered one of the most energetic and brisant of the military high explosives.
Wait, what?
Brisant?
Croissant.
Brisant.
Oh, you must be saying it wrong. It's... God damn it, I can't even do it now. You say it one more time for me so I can
butcher
fuck it up.
Brisant.
Brisant.
Okay.
Brisant. Is it full of butter?
Yeah.
Like
yes.
a whole
buttery explosive.
Like 12,000 layers of butter.
It's considered the butteriest of explosives.
The Pauladine of explosives.
Then you mix the 6 sticks of butter with your nitroglycerin. Oh, it tastes so good.
Flavor bomb.
Oh, I found it. Okay, it's Research Department Explosives.
She's the Unabomber of Flavortown.
Yeah, it says it's Research Department Explosive. So maybe they were just blowing up all the research apartments.
Yeah, could be.
And they just were like, no, just put some TNT in it, but call it something new. RDX.
Residents said a few minutes before the blast, they saw 4 dudes speeding away in a car. Like, right before...
4 Putins.
Right before the explosion.
That would be awesome.
Russian President Boris Yeltsin ordered the search of 30,000 residential buildings in Moscow for explosives. He took personal control of the investigation of the blast.
Which is why I went exactly nowhere.
Putin declared on 13th of September a day of mourning for the victims of the attacks.
And also more bombings.
Yeah. And on 13th of September 1999, at 5 a.m., a large bomb exploded in a basement of an apartment block on Kishurisky Highway in southern Moscow. And,
I don't think you're allergic to that one.
And 6 kilometers from the place of the last attack. This was the deadliest blast in the chain of bombings because the house was built with brick, with 119 people killed and 200 injured.
Those are rookie numbers.
The 8th-story building was flattened, littering the street with debris and throwing some concrete pieces hundreds of meters away.
Tell that to the Taliban.
On the 13th of September, Akimez Gushiev called and reported about bombs planted in several locations. Gushiev claimed that he was framed by his old acquaintance, an FSB officer who asked him to rent basements as storage facilities at 4 locations where bombs were later found. After the second explosion of Kurishskoye Highway, Gushiev recognized he was set up, called the police, and told them about the basements of 2 other buildings at Borisovsky Prudy and Kaputnia, where the explosives were actually found and explosions averted. So, basically this guy's like, yo, I was working with this guy for the FSB. He told me he just needed a place to store things, and, like, now these buildings are blowing up.
He just told me he needed to store the bombs.
So
not that he was going to be blowing things up.
I just want you to know there's bombs in these 2 buildings. You better stop those too. And they found the explosives in those. So,
what if that's just kind of what happened? That's why there was so much TNT in that one building, because they were just storing it all there.
That's one of the theories that people have. Is
and they
that
were like, oops,
it's
wrong
not
building.
it's not so much that the Russian government purposely did it, as they were storing explosives there, and the explosives got sweaty and went off, or something.
They were cleaning them and they went off.
Yeah. So, but the Russian
a creeper found where the explosives.
So that brings us to the 16th of September of 1999. Outside a 9-story apartment complex in the southern Russian city of Volgodonsk, killing 17 people and injuring 69. It was a truck bomb went off. Boom. Like, outside, and killed 17 people and injured 69 more. The bombing took place at 5:57. Surrounding buildings were also damaged, and the blast happened 9 miles from a nuclear power plant. Prime Minister Putin signed a decree calling on law enforcement and other agencies to develop plans within 3 days to protect industry, transportation, communications, and food processing centers and nuclear complexes.
Mm-hmm.
So he's like, we getting bombed all over the place. What you gonna do?
But not apartment buildings.
Elect Putin.
Not apartment buildings.
The
only buildings actually attacked. He's like, not those though. Instead, protect like nuclear sites and food places.
The last one was kind of close to something important. I mean, yeah, important.
Important.
So let's make sure nothing important gets bombed, guys. Let's get out there and protect those important targets.
If you try hard, guys, you give it 110%, guys. I believe in you guys.
You can prevent anything of any significant value from being targeted.
You guys can do whatever you want to, guys.
Literally.
And you can reach for the sky, guys.
You miss 100% of the explosives you don't set off.
Alexander Litvinenko's death from acute radiation sickness was slow and agonizing. But unlike most murder victims, he was able to give extensive interviews to British detectives before he died. The inquiry heard that as he lay on his deathbed, he told them he'd been targeted by the Russian Secret Service on the personal orders of Vladimir Putin.
The trail of polonium traces leads not just from London to Moscow, but directly to the door of Vladimir Putin's office, and that Mr. Putin should be unmasked by this inquiry as nothing more than a common criminal dressed up as a head of state.
Alexander Litvinenko was a former agent for the FSB, the successor organization of the KGB. The fitness fanatic was an outspoken critic of the Kremlin. He fled to the UK in 2000, where he was given political asylum. It's thought he then worked for MI6 and Spanish intelligence as an informer. The inquiry also heard the public statement Litvinenko had written in hospital whilst under police guard. It was read out by his friend Alex Goldfarb. In it, he again points the finger of blame at the Russian president.
You may succeed in silencing one man, but the howl of protest from around the world will reverberate, Mr. Putin, in your ears for the rest of your life.
Alexander Litvinenko fell ill after meeting two Russian contacts, Dmitry Kovtun and Andrei Lugovoy, here at the Millennium Hotel in Grosvenor Square on November the 1st, 2006. He'd drunk tea that had been poisoned with a radioactive isotope, polonium-210. Now, the two men in question are back in Moscow and have been there for years. They're wanted by the British police on suspicion of murder. The inquiry then will attempt to fathom out what their involvement was and ultimately whether or not the Russian state orchestrated the killing. But the inquiry heard there may have been another poisoning attempt. Polonium was detected in places that were visited by the suspects before November the 1st. And crucially, hair samples taken from Litvinenko showed he may have been poisoned with polonium-210 at a meeting on October the 16th in central London. Kovtun and Lugovoy have been charged with Litvinenko's murder in absentia. From the safety of Russia, they even held press conferences accusing MI6 of carrying out the killing. But the inquiry heard that Dmitry Kovtun had met a friend in Hamburg in Germany in the days before the murder. Known as D3, he'll testify anonymously that Kovtun asked him to help with the poison plot because Litvinenko was a traitor with blood on his hands.
Mr. Kovtun then asked him a question that one might think was unusual. Did he, D3, know a cook who was working in London? Mr. Kovtun said that he had a very expensive poison and that he needed the cook to put the poison in Mr. Litvinenko's food or drink.
Lugovoy and Kovtun, both former KGB agents, left a trail of polonium around London and back to Moscow. Businesses and restaurants had to be sealed off. These police graphics released by the inquiry show the varying levels of radiation in one of their hotel rooms. They claim the polonium was planted on them to frame them for murder. In January 2007, I went to meet Andrei Lugovoy at his home on the outskirts of Moscow when he became the main suspect. He repeatedly denied the allegation that he was responsible for the killing. Did you kill Alexander Litvinenko?
Нет, конечно. Более того, я хочу обратить внимание, что...
Of course not. I want to stress that officially I'm just a witness and not even a suspect.
Can you understand, though, why some people say you are the prime suspect?
Ну, почему это происходит, понять, наверное, можно.
I think one can understand that. It's because Dmitry Kovtun and I met Alexander Litvinenko on that fateful day.
Over the next 10 weeks, the inquiry will attempt to unravel the murky events surrounding the murder of Alexander Litvinenko. It is also likely to cause further diplomatic damage, reopening fresh wounds between London and Moscow at a time when relations are already at an all-time low. Alexander Litvinenko's widow hopes the hearing will give her closure. She also wants the truth about her husband to emerge, so it puts an end to 8 years of speculation about her husband's death.
I know my husband was killed. I saw how it did happen. It was a torture. He died long 23 days in front of me, in front of his son, in front of his friends. I don't like, again, people will discuss about Sasha did kill himself, he's smuggling radioactive material, he made a dirty bomb. I'm really fed up with this.
Over the years, Alexander Litvinenko had made a number of very public allegations against Vladimir Putin. He accused the Russian president of ordering the bombing of an apartment block in Moscow as a pretext for the Second Chechen War. He also claimed Putin ordered the murder of his friend, the human rights journalist Anna Politkovskaya. She was gunned down in her Moscow apartment block in October 2006.
He had to be eliminated, not because he was an enemy of the Russian state itself, and certainly not because he was an enemy of the Russian people, but because he had become an enemy of the close-knit group of criminals who surrounded and still surround Vladimir Putin and who keep his corrupt regime in power.
The Kremlin has always denied it was responsible for the murder. It claims the inquiry is part of a wider smear campaign and anti-Russian agenda by the West. But in Russia, many people view Litvinenko as a traitor. The inquiry will consider whether or not that alone was enough to get him killed. Alex Rossi, Sky News, Central London.
All I'm saying is that if little Putin is if Putin is Goldilocks, it's like, do you think that Putin is afraid of bears?
I've seen him garrote a bear with piano wire before, so I don't think he is.
I think I want to just talk more about Goldilocks. What kind of story is that? Why is there bears in the woods making porridge?
I think in
asking the questions.
I'm just saying, that makes no. I feel like that's backwards. It should be a family that went out after making porridge.
I think it was just
for some reason they left the porridge there.
I think they were bugbears.
Okay.
Yeah, that would make sense.
Maybe it was just a racist thing about Russia.
So on the 22nd of September of 1999 at 8:30 p.m., a resident of an apartment building in the city of Ryazan noticed two suspicious men carrying sacks into the basement from a car with a Moscow license plate.
Wait, what year?
This was in 1999 on the 22nd of September, so 6 days after the last bombing. So this guy notices two suspicious men carrying bags into the basement of an apartment building.
He's just moving in.
Yeah. So he's like, He's like already knows all these other bombings have happened before then, and he's like, that's fucking sketchy. So he calls the cops, and so the cops show up, but the guys in the car were gone. Like when the cops finally get there, but in the basement, police found 3 sacks of white powder, each weighing 50 kilograms. A detonator and a timing device were attached and armed, with a timer set to 5:30 a.m.
Huh. Nothing.
Yeah. So,
we didn't find shit.
So of course they just went back home because there's nothing there.
Just go back to sleep, and you'll never realize what happened because
just
by the
Putin
time
slides like through the wall behind them, like fucking Nosferatu, not even like lifting his arms, and then just twist their heads off.
The police just go to everybody in the building and go, look, set your alarm for 5:40 a.m. and just run. I'm not going to tell you why. Just do it. Then they go to sleep. Well, see, then they all go to sleep all like, oh shit, something's about to happen at 5:40 in the morning. Or maybe 6. I don't know. Maybe they were trying to give him enough time. But really, he was like, no, this way they're all asleep.
Got him. So this guy, Yuri Tachenko.
Yurichenko.
Django.
Damn you, Django.
Who was the head of the local bomb squad. He comes in, he like disconnected the detonator and the timer, and then tested the 3 sacks of white substance with a MO2 gas analyzer.
Oh, it's just... Oh, that is not cocaine.
That is not cocaine.
That is explosive.
His head just explodes. And
he rubs some under his gums, and his teeth come out. Like his teeth just comically explode out of his
and
mouth.
They shoot her like a machine gun. Just it's like pegging all the other.
Yep, that's RDX.
And so this gas analyzer thing is like, yo, dude, that right there, that's RDX. Which was the same military explosive that had been used in all the other bombings. So, like, police and rescue vehicles show up, and 30,000 residents were evacuated from the area. 1,200 local police officers, armed with automatic weapons, set up roadblocks on highways around the city and started patrolling railroad stations and airports to hunt the terrorists down. So, at 1:30 a.m. on the 23rd of September... explosive engineers took a bit of the substance from like the sacks to a firing ground located about a mile away from Ryazan for testing. During the substance tests at that area, they tried to explode it by means of a detonator, but their efforts failed. The substance was not detonated, and the explosion did not occur. At 5 a.m., Radio Russia reported about the attempted bombing, noting that the bomb was set to go off at 5:30 in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
They said Ryazan resembled a city under siege. There were composite sketches of 3 suspected terrorists, 2 men and a woman, which were posted all over town and shown on TV. And in the morning, Russian television reported the attempt to blow out the building in Ryazan and identified the explosive used as RDX.
Mm-hmm.
Vladimir Rushailo announced later that police prevented a terrorist act.
Mm-hmm.
And at 4 p.m...
The guy who picked up the phone, he prevented the terrorist act.
I know. And at 4 p.m., they reported that the explosives failed to detonate during their testing outside the city. At 7, Vladimir Putin praised the vigilance of the inhabitants of Ryazan, saying, I would have got away with it if it weren't for those meddling kids.
Exactly.
And called for the air bombing of the Chechen capital Grozny in response to the terrorist acts.
I feel like he's just win-winning here.
Yeah. He's like, quote, if the sacks which proved to contain explosive were noticed, that means there is a positive side to it. If only the fact that the public is reacting correctly to the events taking place in our country today. I'd like to thank the public. No panic, no sympathy for the bandits.
So he's like, alright, good job, you found it. Now I can bomb Chechnya. And then if it blew up, he's just like, maybe eventually I'll get to bomb Chechnya.
Yeah. man, I wish you guys would let me bomb Chechnya because they keep terrorizing us. Fucking Chechnya. Later that evening, a telephone service employee in Ryazan tapped into a long-distance phone conversation and managed to detect a talk in which an out-of-town person suggested to others that they split up and make your way out.
Well, that could be anything.
The person's number was traced to a telephone exchange unit serving FSB offices. When arrested, the detainees produced FSB identification cards. They were soon released on orders from Moscow.
No, I'm not suspicious at all.
That's, I'm sure that's just a coincidence.
It's unrelated. They were undercover at a party, and they were a little too drunk on vodka. They split up and make their way out.
They were just prank phone calls, bro.
Exactly, it was just a prank.
Just a prank, bro. So,
it's just a prank, comrade.
It's just prank, comrade. Chill the fuck out. Sergey, no! Don't detonate those.
It was only practical joke, comrade.
It's funny, no? Yes? No? Yes?
You killed so many kids.
Come on, buddy. He's like, come on, buddy.
Come on, buddy.
So,
it's a joke.
On the 24th of September, FSB Director Nikolai Patrushev announced that it was just a prank. he's like, nah, we were like carrying out tests for if there was ever an actual bombing. Like,
it wasn't me, it was the vodka.
Yeah, we were just like, that's why they were there, because it was like an exercise. Not unlike a certain Mr. Richard Cheney, who happened to be running an exercise about if planes hit the World Trade Center on the day that planes hit the World Trade Center.
Exactly.
I'm sure it was a coincidence.
Exactly. It was just a military drill.
That kind of thing could totally happen on accident.
Totally on accident.
And in no way does it make it seem like it was a plan. And they were like, we're sorry.
We're
like,
sorry.
That's it. That's like the whole thing.
We're sorry.
And Evgeny Savatoyanov, a former FSB director of Moscow, categorically denied that any such exercise could be performed on residential buildings with inhabitants inside without notifying local authorities.
Oh, why should you be so sensitive about it?
This guy's like, there's no fucking way that was a test.
When did that guy
die? Probably shortly after this.
I'm assuming within a week.
Yeah.
From a test bomb.
He committed suicide with 2 bullets to the back of the head.
I'm sure he did. Unfortunately, our internet won't let me just Google him. I do have some people who are connected to this that...
What was his name?
Happen to have bad... Oh, dude, I am never going to be able to spell it. It is... Okay, it's EVGENIY... Fuck. And then it's Sevastoyanov. SAVOSTOYANOV.
I got this.
Sevastoyanov. I believe in you.
Former head of blah blah blah. Wow, he must still be alive. He was in the news in 2015.
He probably got paid.
I mean, not anymore, but...
So,
let me check out this. Okay. It has an alternate spelling for his name that's not any easier to pronounce. Yevgeny Savastoyanov. Jesus Christ.
So originally the FSB was like, nah, dude, that was a real threat. And then after they caught those people who were FSB operatives, then they were like, nah, it was security training. We were kidding, man. It was
we're just testing to see if they would notice.
Yeah,
you guys
did.
Got us.
Good job.
You got us.
Oh.
And
his name, if you want to say it in English, is Eugene.
What?
Yeah.
It's like 85 syllables.
Yeah. But it has like 9 different spellings in Russian, but it's like, yeah, this translates to Eugene.
How it's evil? It's clearly evil genie.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, a couple of them definitely say evil genie. But, you know.
There's no English, version of that.
So, originally, it was reported that what was being used was hexagen explosives, like the RDX explosives. But once they were kind of like, shit, there's only one place in all of Russia that makes RDX, which is the city of Perm, in a factory owned by the Russian government that's under like super heavy lock and key. How would we explain how that would have disappeared from that factory? They're like, actually, it was a mix of aluminum powder, nitrate, sugar, and TNT prepared by the perpetrators in a concrete mixer at a fertilizer factory in Urus Martin, Chechnya.
Yeah. They added this very rare Chechen mineral.
Yeah. No, this is Chechnyan concrete.
Exactly.
You can tell. It's different.
You can tell from the Chechen symbols.
And Yuri Tkachenko, the explosive expert who defused the bomb, was like, no, dude, that was real fucking explosive.
Yeah.
That was real RDX. That was not a fake bomb.
That's the guy who tested it and lost all his teeth?
Yeah.
Okay.
When his mouth
He's
exploded.
like, he said that the explosives, including a timer, a power source, and a detonator, were genuine military equipment, and obviously prepared by a professional.
Pulling out like white-looking Doritos.
Because all Russians have sharp teeth, like sharks.
They're the new Dorito flavor.
Explosive white. Oh shit! That reminds me. Did you guys hear that story about they're making lady Doritos now?
Yeah, I just saw that.
What?
They're making Doritos for her.
Yeah, that are like not going to crunch as loud because women don't like crunching chips. According to Doritos,
they should make a Doritos for him and just make it like
it's
eating
double,
It's
double loud.
It's twice as loud.
It's like biting into a fucking brick.
It's like it's just straight up
shatters windows.
How big of a man are you? Just people like losing their fucking teeth, like constantly being admitted
all
to the yard.
All the air bubbles in the Dorito chips are those little popper things that you throw on the ground.
New explosive spicy salsa.
It's like extreme cheddar is the flavor with like 90 X's. Extreme.
Just like,
and then at the bottom it just says not suitable for consumption, but they're selling it anyway.
John Cena is just like the logo.
Yeah.
Oh Jesus!
So
I just picture this white powder and someone's like putting it on their cornflakes. It's just I love the smell of nitroglycerin.
And the government was basically, he was like, nah, like this gas analyzer, it's definitely RDX. It wasn't any other kind of explosive. And the government's like, maybe your gas analyzer malfunctioned. And he's like, no. That thing cost $20,000 and was maintained by a specialist who worked according to a strict schedule, checking the analyzer after each use and making frequent prophylactic checks.
Yeah, I think the prophylactic checks were done in Chechnya.
Yeah, they were trying to frame the Russian government. However, later at a press conference on the occasion of the Federal Security Service Employee Day, or FSB Employee Day, in December of 2001, Tkachenko denounced his previous conclusions and said the detonator was a hunting cartridge, that it would not be able to detonate any known explosives.
Sure. Yeah.
He's like, no, dude, that wouldn't have worked. No, I take it back. Hey, so, like, could you release my family now? Please, Mr. Putin?
No. Niet.
Niet.
So, after this is when they started rounding up the Dagestan Liberation Army people, saying that, oh, these are the guys that did it. And the main guy, I can't find his fucking name. All these names look the same.
Let me guess, it's Yurgachev
Stogianov. So the main guy for the Chechnyan group or whatever, when they arrested him, he's like, no, dude, we didn't do that. Which, literally, this is a terrorist organization. If they had killed that many people, they would have been like, yeah, of course we did it.
What,
he's
like,
like,
stupid?
But he's like, nah, dude, that wasn't us. We don't have a problem with the people of Russia. We have a problem with the army of Russia. And Russia's like, liar! And, like, takes them to court anyway. The official investigation was concluded in 2002. According to the Russian State Prosecutor Office, all apartment bombings were executed under the command of ethnic Karakay Akamez Gochiyev and planned by Ibn al-Khattab and Abu Omar al-Saif.
Alright, you're just making up names.
Arab militants fighting in Chechnya on the side of the Chechnyan insurgents.
Those people weren't even Russian?
No. Yeah, they're like, no, it was like the Muslim dudes hiding out in Chechnya that did it, even though the people who called in had Caucasian accents. Like, the people who called in about the bombings were, like, white people.
Yeah.
But hello, I am white.
Yeah.
Listen to my flawless English accent.
Yay!
Just like hamburger.
Hamburger.
With cheese.
Your girl, she kicked my dog. She kicked my dog. So,
I wonder if Russian people have nicknames that aren't super ridiculously long, or do they just call everybody like
Paddywhack?
That's it. Yep. They just go around in their little tracksuits, going, "What up, Paddywhack?"
Vodka.
Give dog bone.
So, according to court ruling, Al-Khattab paid Kochriyev $500,000 to carry out the attacks on Guryanova Street, Kashihirskoye Highway, basically the ones that were on like apartment buildings, and let's see. And so they're like, this guy brought the explosives here in like a Mercedes Benz and delivered it to Moscow, and set up the bombs and blew up these places. Two members of Gochayev's group who had carried out the attacks, Adam Dekushev and Yusuf Krumshakalov, have both been sentenced to life terms in a special regime colony, which sounds fine. Sounds like probably like a Sandals.
Exactly, that's what I was thinking.
Except
luxurious.
It's like a Sandals, but in Siberia.
But a gulag.
It's like sandals except clogs.
Both defendants have pled guilty only to some of the charges. For instance, Dekushev acknowledged that he knew the explosives he transported would be used for an act of terror. He also confirmed Gochayev's role in the attacks. Dekushev was extradited to Russia on 14th of April 2002 to stand trial, and Krumshakalov was apprehended and extradited to Moscow. In 2000, 6 bombers involved in the Boyansk attack were arrested in Azerbaijan and convicted of the bombing. Akamez Gochayev, the head of the group that carried out the attacks and allegedly the main organizer, remains a fugitive and is under an international search warrant. In a statement released in January of 2004, the FSB said, quote, "Until we arrest Gochayev, the investigation of the apartment block bombings of 1999 will not be finished."
And he will never be found.
Yep.
Even though they're totally looking for him real hard.
We don't know what happened to Comrade.
But
Shame.
We believe he is in Andromeda Galaxy.
We shall miss him.
Most excellent and loyal terrorist.
It doesn't take a genius to realize that this was used as like a stepping stone for like the war in Chechnya, because Chechnyans had like bombed, right? And this was a huge boost for Vladimir Putin's popularity.
What the fuck? How'd
like,
you go from that to being more popular?
He's like all over TV. He's like these. He's like, those fucking Chechnyans, man. We're gonna find them. We're gonna break their fucking legs, man. Just watch. I'm sick of these fucking Chechnyans sitting on my fucking couch.
Just the fucking swords coming off the wall.
You better tell your fucking friend, man. You better. These people don't talk to you, man. Nobody talks to you. Just fucking like, he's like rolls into Chechnya, and like
a lot of people die.
A lot of fucking people die. A lot of people die.
Well, that's just coincidence.
But Putin, like, his popularity shot up because he's like, look how badass I am. And basically ended up bringing the pro-war Unity Party to the State Duma and Putin to the presidency within like a couple of months, just because of how popular he became because of this.
A little suspicious.
Yeah.
A little bit.
With Yeltsin and his family facing possible criminal prosecution, however, a plan was put into motion to put in place a successor who would guarantee that Yeltsin and his family would be safe from prosecution and the criminal division of property in the country would not be subject to re-examination. For Operation Successor to succeed, however, it was necessary to have a massive provocation. In my view, this provocation was the bombing in September of 1999 of the apartment building bombings in Moscow, Buyansk, and Volgodonsk. In the aftermath of these attacks, which claimed 300 lives, a new war was launched against Chechnya. Putin, the newly appointed prime minister who was put in charge of that war, achieved overnight popularity. Yeltsin resigned early, and Putin was elected president, and his first act was to guarantee Yeltsin immunity from prosecution.
I don't see what's weird about all this. Why are we doing this?
Yeah. I mean, this doesn't seem like our purview.
I know.
Based on all the internet videos I've seen of what life is like in Russia, this seems like pretty much like a normal Monday.
Yeah, this all happened on like one day.
I mean, basically, it was like, what, a week?
Yeah.
Oh, well.
Pretty much.
Back to work.
Guess I'll Putin.
So,
that Putin guy seems like a great guy.
So, the Russian Duma rejected 2 motions for a parliamentary investigation of the Ryazan incident. They were like, nah. You don't need to worry about that.
I don't want to die.
You're good. Have some vodka.
Like,
that was his solution. He just got the entire country drunk. Okay, everybody, I turned this country around. Celebrate for the next
shots
for the next 12 years. Shots, 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 shots.
What about the shots?
Shot, 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 That guy's just an advertiser.
Holy shit! What was that guy's name?
Yeah, that's the shit I've been reading all day. Sheboygan. That guy's name was Sheboygan.
My name is Sheboygan Juvgoigagovsh.
His name was Dis Your Boy.
Dis Your Boy Sheboygan. Yo, this your boy Sheboygan. Welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to be playing Roblox.
Smash that like button.
Smash that like button.
You guys
send
can call
me
me
some
Dis.
money.
You guys can just call me Dis or your boy.
Your boy.
For
Y'all,
Sheboygan.
If you want to see my dick, press 3.
All the options are 3.
All the options are 3.
For every person that subscribes, I have my dick on live video for another hour. Oh shit, I have 4 million subscribers. My dick is gonna be out for the rest of my life.
My dick is on fire.
Let me wash it, please. So, basically the Duma's like, nah, dog, you don't need to know about that.
You good.
But, obviously,
they did need to know.
People like the families of people who died in the explosions, or also Russian journalists, were like, look, man, like, this is kind of fucking sketchy. Like, don't we deserve to know the truth? And Putin's like,
just does the shit from Duel the Tough. He just like laughs and just like throne retreats back into the wall.
And the poison snakes come flying at everybody. Then they dodge a bunch of spears.
And like a bunch of bears come running, wearing like Cossack hats,
and like starts playing that the like Russian anthem or whatever.
I thought the Russian anthem was that song on YouTube.
And despite Putin's protests, these people weren't willing to let it go.
10 years after Anna Politkovskaya's murder, the Kremlin critic's colleagues and friends have paid tribute to her. This woman's poster reads, "They killed her on the day of President Vladimir Putin's birthday. Hard to believe it's a mere coincidence." The group gathered in front of the offices of the Russian journalist's former newspaper, Novaya Gazeta, where people demanded that investigators track down those responsible for masterminding her shooting in her apartment building. This mourner said, generally speaking, since her murder, there have been more than 700 attacks against journalists. 57 were killed. It's an utter tragedy that in Russia specifically, those who tell people the truth become the victims, and these cases are never solved. 6 people were convicted for involvement in the killing. However, the US joined the calls of her colleagues to bring to justice those who instructed her murder. Ongoing impunity continues to undermine freedom of speech and respect for justice and human rights in Russia, a statement read.
Into his chest like fucking Zorro.
He might as well have put it on his fucking forehead. So this guy, Alexander Litvinenko, he was a former officer of the Russian FSB and the KGB, and he fled court prosecution in Russia and ended up getting political asylum in the UK. On November 1st of 2006, Litvinenko suddenly fell ill and was hospitalized. Earlier that day, he had met 2 former KGB officers, Andrei Lugovoy and Dmitry Kovtun. Lugovoy was a bodyguard of Igor Gaidar, who was a former Russian ex-prime minister, who was also poisoned on November of 2006, and former chief of security for the Russian TV channel ORT. Kovtun, now a businessman, was having lunch with Litvinenko at Itsu, a sushi restaurant in Piccadilly, London, with an Italian officer and nuclear expert, Mario Scaramella, to whom he reportedly made allegations regarding Romano Prodi's connections with the KGB. Scaramella, attached to the Mitrokhin Commission, investigated KGB penetration of Italian politics. And claimed to have information on the death of Anna Politkovskaya, who was a journalist who was killed at her Moscow apartment in 2006, who we will get to in a little bit. Basically, these guys supposedly gave Litvinenko papers about her, like, how she died. And on the 20th of November, it was reported that Scaramella had gone into hiding and feared for his life. So, for several days after the 1st of November, Litvinenko experienced severe diarrhea and vomiting. At one point, he couldn't walk without assistance. As the pain intensified, Litvinenko asked his wife to call an ambulance.
He just ate bad sushi.
For several weeks, Litvinenko's condition worsened as doctors searched for the cause of his illness.
Sushi.
Surrounded by friends, Litvinenko became physically weak and spent periods unconscious. A photograph was later taken of Litvinenko on his deathbed and released to the public. "I want the world to see what they did to me," Litvinenko said.
The sushi shop?
Wow, that guy must feel like shit. If he didn't kill himself.
On the 3rd of November 2006, Litvinenko was admitted for further investigation at Barnet General Hospital after he got moved from University College Hospital, which is where he was for intensive care. His blood and urine samples were sent to the UK's Atomic Weapons Establishment for testing. Scientists at the AWE tested for radioactive poison using gamma spectroscopy. No gamma rays were detected. However, a small spike was noticed at an energy of 803 kiloelectron volts. The BBC reported that by coincidence, another scientist who had worked on Britain's early atomic bomb program before happened to overhear a discussion about the small spike and recognized it as the alpha ray signal from polonium-210. So what is polonium-210?
I believe it's a rare sushi ingredient.
Get this, polonium-210 is only found one way and one way only right now, which is as emissions from a Russian class of nuclear submarine. It's literally the emissions from that thing's nuclear reactor, the K-27.
Huh.
So that's interesting.
How did that get into sushi?
How did that get in this motherfucker's sushi? So
what did he order?
Like, literally, this guy, like,
he ordered the fucking, like, let me get that California roll. Ooh.
Let me get that K-27.
Let me get that K-27 California roll, son.
On November of 22nd, Litvinenko's heart failed.
He just sprinkled that shit in there.
Fucking sushi.
Yeah.
He's just in a fucking, like,
he's like,
hazmat suit.
He's like, this will make his dookie twinkle. He's like sprinkling it in. The balla. And so on November 22nd, his heart failed. And he died at 9:21 p.m. at University College Hospital in London. During his autopsy, they found that he had ingested polonium-210, which is only found in nuclear submarines.
He's like
from the Soviet Union nuclear submarine, the K-27.
He's in like a foreign sushi restaurant, but doesn't speak the native language. So he's like, "What is polonium sushi roll?" And it's literally like on the menu, but just his menu. There's like a little taped on piece at the end of the fucking sushi
it's
roll.
Just written in crayon.
That's written in Russian so we can read it. Polonium roll. Let me get the polonium roll.
No, he's just eating some cereal. It's polonium-O's.
Doctors told his buddy Mario Scaramella that the body had 5 times the lethal dose of polonium-210 in it.
I told him to stop eating them polonium-O's.
On the 25th of November, an article attributed to Litvinenko was published by the Mail, entitled "Why I Believe Putin Wanted Me Dead." In his last statement, he said about Putin, "This may be the time to say one or two things to the person responsible for my present condition. You may succeed in silencing me, but that silence comes at a price. You've shown yourself to be as barbaric and ruthless as your most hostile critics have claimed. You've shown yourself to have no respect for life, liberty, or any civilized value. You've shown yourself to be unworthy of your office, to be unworthy of the trust of civilized men and women. You may succeed in silencing one man, but the howl of protest from around the world will reverberate, Mr. Putin, in your ears for the rest of your life. May God forgive you for what you have done, not only to me, but to beloved Russia and its people."
Now could someone kindly bring me some more polonium?
What a fucking critic, man.
So,
I get it. You don't like the movie.
Detectives ended up tracing 3 distinct polonium trails in and out of London at different dates.
What if 3 different people poisoned him with different polonium?
Which, according to the investigation, suggests Andrei Lugovoy and Dmitry Kovtun made 2 failed attempts to administer polonium to him before the final and successful one. The first attempt was
like they're on like a fucking balcony above him.
Yeah.
Trying to drop polonium in his drink.
They're trying to roofie him with polonium, and it's just not working.
The first attempt took place on the 16th of October 2006. Basically, they found traces leading everywhere that these guys had gone to visit.
Yeah, because
and
they're just throwing polonium everywhere, trying to get in his drink, and they keep
missing. They had tried to poison his tea, but he did not drink it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like,
why is my tea bubbling?
Apparently, Lugovoy and Kovtun didn't even know they were handling a radioactive poison. They just kind of thought it was a poison.
Yo, this dope's awesome. It's like glowing green and shit.
They stored it in their hotel rooms, used ordinary towels to clean up leaks, and eventually disposed of the poison in the toilet. On the 17th of October, perhaps realizing they contaminated their rooms, they prematurely checked out, moved to another hotel, and left London the next day. Another unsuccessful...
I don't know how to say this, but I think I spilled polonium in my drink.
Oh, shit.
Oh, fuck. I think I'm gonna have cancer.
So, another unsuccessful assassination attempt took place on the 25th of October when Lugovoy and Koftin flew to London again. They left radioactive traces again in their hotel prior to meeting Litvinenko, but did not administer the poison, perhaps due to security cameras in the meeting room. They again dumped the poison in the toilet and then left London. The third attempt to poison Litvinenko took place at around 5 p.m. of the 1st of November in the Millennium Hotel in Grosvenor Square. The bus he traveled into the hotel had no signs of radioactivity, but large amounts had been detected at the hotel. Polonium was subsequently found in a fourth-floor room and in a cup in the Pine Bar at the hotel. After the Millennium Bar, Litvinenko stopped at the office of Boris Berezovsky. He used a fax machine where radioactive contamination was found. At 6 p.m., Ahmed Zakayev...
They faxed him some fucking polonium.
They're trying to fax him the poison. It's just the chemical diagram of it that they're faxing to him.
It's better than
He's
that.
like...
They're in their hotel room. They're in their hotel, with the product, sitting on the scanner, just scanning it to him, and they're like, "This will show him. He's going to read facts and die." It's like some cartoon shit.
So the amount of radioactivity left by Litvinenko was so significant that the car was rendered unusable.
Jesus.
Everything that he touched at home during the next 3 days was contaminated. His family was unable to return to the house even 6 months later.
Good God.
Because of how fucking radioactive this guy was. His wife tested positive for ingesting polonium, but did not leave a secondary trail behind. This suggested that anyone who left a trail could not have picked up the polonium from Litvinenko, possibly including Lugovoy and Koftin. The patterns and levels of radioactivity the assassins left behind suggested that Litvinenko ingested polonium, whereas Lugovoy and Koftin handed it directly. The human body dilutes polonium before excreting it in sweat, which results in a reduced radioactivity level. There were also traces of polonium-210 found at the Hey Joe Abracadabra Bar, the Dar Marrakesh restaurant, and Lambeth Mercedes taxis. Basically only 2 other people could have left those polonium trails, which were Lugovoy and Koftin, other than Litvinenko, who was poisoned with it. British Airways later published a list of 221 flights of contaminated aircraft involving around 33,000 passengers and invited those potentially affected to contact the UK Department of Health for help. So this guy was poisoned with something that literally only can be found in nuclear submarines.
In Russia.
In Russia, Soviet nuclear submarines, and it was so fucking radioactively poisonous that everywhere he went, it was like a cloud of death.
Yeah.
Because he was that fucking radioactive.
Must have been the Chinese.
Yeah, had to have been. It's a frame up. It's a frame up, see?
Yeah, thought y'all had all figured out, eh? Yeah.
Thought you knew what's up, huh?
Mm-hmm.
So, on the 7th of October of 2006, Russian journalist, writer, and human rights activist Anna Politkovskaya was shot dead in the elevator of her apartment block in Moscow. She was known for her opposition to the Chechnya conflict and for criticism of Vladimir Putin. She basically wrote a bunch of books about the Chechnya wars, as well as Putin's Russia, which was a book about what Putin was going to do to Russia and how shitty he is. Her murder, believed to be a contract killing, sparked a strong international reaction. 3 Chechens were arrested for the murder, but were acquitted. The verdict was overturned by the Supreme Court of Russia, and new trials were held. In total, 6 people were convicted of charges related to her death. So, basically in 2004, she started getting death threats because of, like, her writing. And then in December of 2005, while attending a conference on freedom of the press organized by Reporters Without Borders in Austria, Polikovskaya said, "People sometimes pay with their lives for saying aloud what they think. In fact, one can even get killed for giving me information. I'm not the only one in danger. I have examples to prove it." She even was getting mailed, like, mock rapes or mock executions of her by, like...
Just like Gamergate.
Yeah, just like shit like that. And on the 7th of October 2006, she was found dead in her elevator. The assassination occurred on Vladimir Putin's birthday, coincidence that did not go unnoticed.
Yeah.
The funeral
Happy
was
birthday.
The funeral was held at Troikurovskoye Cemetery. Before she was buried, more than 1,000 people filed past her coffin. Dozens of her colleagues, public figures, and admirers of her work gathered for the funeral. No high-ranking Russian officials were seen at the ceremony.
That's not bad. They'd be dead.
Yeah.
They were all wearing fake mustaches so as not to be seen.
After a week after the assassination, Alexander Litvinenko accused Putin of sanctioning the murder. 2 weeks after that statement, Litvinenko died of polonium.
Yeah.
2 days before his death, he wrote a statement in case he did not make it. He said, "Name the bastard. Anna Politkovskaya did not do it, so I will, for both of us. You may succeed in silencing one man, but blah, 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 house of protest." So, according to some reports, Litvinenko tried to investigate her death, and he was also writing a book about FSB activities, including concentration camps in Chechnya.
Yeah, I don't see the connection.
No, I don't see. Yeah, that's weird. It's weird.
Some weird shit.
It's weird. I don't see any kind of connection here between...
He said the name of the podcast.
So, I also have here a Mr. Sergei Yushchenko, who was a liberal Russian politician known for his campaigning for democracy, rapid free market economic reforms, and higher human rights standards in Russia. And this guy was assassinated on 17th of April 2003, just hours after registering his political party to participate in the 2003 parliamentary elections. Yushchenko was shot dead near his house in Moscow on the 17th of April of 2003. He had registered his group of the Liberal Russia Party to participate in the parliamentary elections in 55 regions. His last known public utterance was, "Registration has been completed." Mikhail Treshpeskin believed that Yushchenko was murdered because he was a leader of an opposition party that openly challenged the power of the FSB and Russian authorities. Nah. I don't believe it.
That can't be.
He also promised voters an independent investigation of the Russian apartment bombings, a key issue of his election campaign. Just before his death, Yushchenko received threats from a high-ranking FSB general, Alexander Mikhailov, according to Grigory Pasko. 4 people have been convicted during a controversial trial for the murder of Sergei Yushchenko and are currently serving prison sentences. Most prominent among them is Mikhail Kodanev, a former co-chair of the Liberal Russia Party organized by Yushchenko. During the trial, Mikhail Kodanev strenuously claimed to be innocent. He later tried to commit suicide and was placed in the FSB special Lefortovo prison. According to attorney Henry Rechtik, Kodanev was convicted solely on the basis of the false testimony of another convicted suspect, Alexander Vinnik, who made a series of contradictory claims. Critics also insist that the political murders of 2 chairmen of the Liberal Russia Party should have been considered as the same case in court, which would make it clear that some of the suspects were wrongly accused. Let's see. some observers noted that Kodanev was relatively unknown in Russian politics until he was named to Yushkanov's party. Who's another one of the guys that ended up dead. Former FSB officer Alexander Litvinenko suggested that Sergei Yushkanov could have been killed because he knew that the FSB organized the Moscow theater hostage crisis. Then I have this guy, Yuri Petrovov Shekonchukin, who was a writer who made his name writing about campaigning against the influence of organized crime and corruption. His last nonfiction book, Slaves of the KGB, were about people who worked as KGB informers. As a journalist, he had investigated the Russian apartment bombings and the Three Whales corruption scandal, which involved high-ranking FSB officers and was related to money laundering through the Bank of New York. Shenkov died suddenly on the 3rd of July 2003 after a mysterious 16-day illness. It was officially declared that he died from an allergic Lyell syndrome, which is a form of toxic epidermal necrosis. And what toxic epidermal necrosis is basically
AIDS.
your fucking skin starts melting off.
Jesus.
Like
arguably worse.
Arguably worse than AIDS. Treatments do not typically change the course of the underlying disease.
I bet they do change the course.
It is
Rest
it's
in
more
peace.
common in females than males. Typical onset is over the age of 40. So yeah, that
They don't assassinate you gently.
no, no, they don't. He was his medical treatment and his postmortem took place in Central Clinical Hospital, which is, quote, tightly controlled by the Russian Federal Security Service, or the FSB, because it treats top-ranking Russian officials. His relatives were denied an official medical report about the cause of his illness. They were forbidden to take samples of his tissues for an independent medical investigation. And journalists of Novoya Gazeta magazine, or Novoya Gazeta, which was a newspaper that he worked for, managed to send his tissue specimen to, quote, major foreign specialists. The experts did not reach any definite conclusion. This caused widespread speculation about the cause of his death, especially since another member of the Kovalev Commission, Sergei Yushkanov, was assassinated that same year. And the legal counsel and investigator of the commission, Mikhail Trepashkin, was arrested by Russian authorities. Some news reports drew parallels between the poisonings of Shekovin Litvinenko and Vladimir Putin's former bodyguard, Roman Sepov, who died in a similar way in St. Petersburg in September of 2004. Others noted that Lecha Islamov, a Chechnyan rebel who died in a Russian prison in 2004, all were cases of poisoning, and united not only by the clinical picture, which is identical even in terms of the details, but also by the facts that the traces of the poisoners clearly point to one address, Moscow, FSB headquarters, according to Chechen press.
Isn't, Russia 90% Moscow, though?
It's most of their population is in 3 cities, and then the rest is spread out.
No, I think they have quite a few cities that are pretty big.
Oh, okay.
At least 4.
Yeah.
At least 4 or 5.
Most of them are just such Russian crazy names that you kind of all just assume it's just Moscow. It's like Moscow, St. Petersburg, Moscow Jr. I think that's the 3.
Moscow the 3rd. So, yeah, that's pretty much it for the Russian apartment bombings. Basically, Putin blew a bunch of people up and
became popular,
and like became like a big scary Bond villain type guy who rules over everything.
And is richer and more powerful than God.
Richer and more powerful than God. Probably has more money than the fucking Vatican.
I wonder how long it's going to take him to poison God.
God is dead.
I mean, you know, for being slightly above him, like no one can be above me.
So
I must murder God.
So, what do you think of the Russian apartment bombings, Palmer?
Fake news.
Fake news? How so?
I mean, it's just a coincidence.
Exactly.
I mean,
you think
Putin is an upstanding citizen of Russia. He has turned that country around. Why would he kill a whole bunch of people?
So do you think he assassinated all those journalists because he didn't do it? And
no, I think other people did it for him because he was such a good guy, and these people were talking ill of him. So they were like, no, you don't talk ill of my leader.
Papa Putin.
And then they just kill them. So it's like, his hands are clean. He didn't do anything wrong.
Did you guys hear about that one guy he assassinated, where the dude like?
No, he didn't assassinate him.
Allegedly, he allegedly assassinated this guy when he opened his glove box. There was a bear in there.
Did you hear about the assassination where the guy ate a piece of sushi that was laced with literally an exponent of a Russian nuclear submarine's reactor, and there's nowhere else you could get that from?
I'm just saying. Those Japanese sushi chefs also
dabble in some crazy ingredients.
I mean, what? Okay, I mean, is it just a coincidence that they probably served food on submarines? They had to have chefs, right?
How else would they catch the fish if not with a submarine?
Yeah.
Boom.
So, what do you think of the Russian apartment bombings, Ryan?
Oh yeah, that's Putin.
What?
Whoa!
100%, 200%. Vladimir Ilyich Putin.
You think he's Putin on the Ritz?
I think he's putting it on the Ritz big time. A lot of
What's
bodies.
he putting on the Ritz? Like
bodies,
plutonium,
polonium 210,
polonium 210 on the Ritz.
Polonium 210 on the Ritz.
It's just like a picture of him.
It'll melt your
Putin
skin
holding
off.
like a Ritz cracker, just like sprinkling plutonium on it.
But no, in all seriousness, I think it was the Chechens. And I think they're just they're just trying to make Putin look bad.
Yeah, it could have been. I think it's Putin. 200%. I think it was Putin. I mean, for real, nobody else benefited from this shit as much as he did.
Bono.
Like, cui bono? Who benefits? And there's nobody else in the world that got more out of this than he did. As far as especially the murder of the journalists, the poisonings of the journalists, that seemed personal because he wanted to make sure they died hard.
Yeah,
he wasn't just killing them; he killed them in a way that hurt bad.
I think it was funny that one of the original, or I wasn't really listening that well, but that one chick got elevated. Jesus, he got murdered in an elevator on his birthday. I feel like that's someone in the KGB or whatever the other institution, FSB, whatever, going,
they're
happy birthday.
They're like, this is for you, Daddy.
Yeah. They're just so you know, we're still up to our normal shit. We killed her. I mean, allegedly. We just happened to be in the same building, on the same elevator, at the same time of a murder. Just saying. I mean, I didn't kill her.
I'm sure it's a coincidence.
I don't know. I walked out of that elevator just fine. Shit. Something must have happened to her.
Yeah, it's weird that everybody died. That's so weird to me that all these people connected to it that tried to look into it outside of the FSB investigation died. And that's really,
I think the most disturbing one was the dude that had his skin melt off. They wouldn't let the family see him or
take tissue samples.
I just imagine there's the FSB two giant Russian dudes sitting outside the whatever it's called, it's not the morgue or whatever they have in the hospital, whatever that's called.
It's a morgue.
Yeah, morgue. And they're just both standing out there who are you? No one's allowed in.
They're in fucking those radioactive proof suits.
Family.
They're in those radiation suits.
Yeah.
The big bright yellow ones. They're
no questions.
No questions.
Can I go see him? No.
No.
There's no dead body in here.
Wait,
They've
yeah, that's it.
Niet. And then they're sitting there like, well, they said he was in there. There's currently no dead bodies in this hospital.
Yeah.
This hospital, greatest hospital. No dead bodies. No one died here.
Only alive.
Everybody is happy. Everybody went
Nobody
chum
even
tonight.
sick.
Only living corpses.
Nobody is even sick. They're coming here to get prescription drugs because they have problem. But it makes them happy.
Happy drugs.
Happy drugs.
No polonium.
No polonium.
Absolutely no.
And he's just holding
risk.
a giant like uranium sticker.
He has one of those
like,
clickers that's just going
off the fucking charts.
Like off the fucking charts.
The one dude's holding that. The other dude has a briefcase with a giant radioactive sticker on it.
They're like trying to cram the briefcase in the toilet. It's just not going. They're like trying to flush it and it's just slapping around in the bowl. Like, I don't understand. He said to flush the poison. Why won't it flush?
We're going to need bigger toilet.
These puny toilets are so small. Be fucking incredible.
Need big American toilets.
So you got a shout out this week, Palmer?
Well, first of all, shout out to Tide Pod commercials during the Super Bowl. The probably best commercials for the decade, for sure.
It's maybe they're Tide commercials.
But
Roll Tide.
Roll Tide. But yeah, I think I'm gonna have to go with acrylic adhesive.
Okay.
Nice.
What's acrylic adhesive?
It's that generic stuff that's like like it comes with like the can with the paintbrush on the lid. That really like the stuff that you
the rubber cement.
Yeah, it's called acrylic adhesive.
Oh, so rubber cement is a company name.
Yes, kind of like Band-Aid.
Like adhesive strips.
Yeah, exactly. Except it's like this. It's just that stereotypical thing you think of when people are like, "Yeah, I sniff glue."
Yeah, it smells great.
It does smell fantastic.
So, I I have never had one complaint.
So, Ryan, you got a shout out this week?
My shout out this week is to all our listeners who come literally from the Kremlin.
Please do not assassinate us. I don't even eat sushi that often, dog. Like, it wouldn't work.
If you try and come at me in the street with some polonium, that shit's gonna be deflected.
I'm gonna hold up a mirror real fast, and then whatever bounces off of me sticks to you.
That's right.
And that's how it goes. This week, my shout out is to the show Altered Carbon, which was really fucking dope.
Nice.
It's like less like Blade Runner and a little more like Ghost in the Shell and Shadowrun. Like it's like there's like this kind of a mysticism to it and like a lot of interesting dynamics to the world, and like the mystery was actually like cool enough that I was like on the edge of my seat watching it. And then you get rewarded with like kick-ass action scenes too, which is a lot of fun.
Nice, I'm gonna check that out.
Yeah, so that'll be dope.
Shout out to Robert Kite. It's your birthday today.
What? Happy birthday, Robert!
Happy birthday!
Happy birthday, dude!
Merry
I
birthday.
miss you. Haven't seen you in a long time. I
Quick
miss
burst.
your scent. I miss your musk.
I miss you and I love you.
Shit, what was that?
Oh, I think
Is that the
my
doorbell?
pizza's here. Hold on.
You're always ordering some pizza.
Always ordering pizza, dude.
Hungry.
Like, I wish I had the money for pizza like that.
Oh shit!
Oh shit!
One man has the strength of 100 bear. His sweat is a Pilsner beer. When you caught him out, fly a swarm of bees. President Vladimir. He hates gay like he's secretly gay. He don't give shits on Ukraine. He throw you in jail if girls sing in mass, and he definitely is not gay. Putin take off shirt to show out OPEC chest. Lay women like he lay oil pie. He take shit and then pull up his pants because Putin have no care for why. Ride a horse, balance pen, look bored, eat a bird, jump in ocean and then make baby cry. Touch fire, go to doctor, doctor say don't touch fire, but you're Putin, so now doctor go to jail. Set back clock on human rights, take Crimea and no say thank. You had Olympics and have finished your tell, surprise. You've been Vlad pranked. Putin bench press man who is doing curls. Edward Snowden no fucks can give. Fall asleep during UN debate because for 200 years Putin live. Speak to dog with his mind. Go to sleep on his foe. President Vladimir.